Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Randy Bach. I'm the president of the Newton Taxpayers Association, and we're here for another episode of the ever-exciting Taxpayer Talk. Taxpayer Association standing up for smart spending in Newton. And I'm honored to have as my guest tonight City Councilor at Large from Ward 7, MarcLaredo. And we are going to have a discussion about all things Newton. And I just give a quick intro. Mark is one of those rarities in Newton, a lifelong Newton resident, and I'm hoping he can give us a perspective. A lot of us are newcomers, and we're happy to be here. We're happy to be welcomed so warmly, but it's not everybody that comes on our show that has the lifelong perspective of being able to tell us, how Newton was, where it's going, and be near the controls of our destiny as a city. So we love our garden city. From our perspective, we like to keep it healthy, and part of the central focus of any entity's health, whether it's your household, your family, your school, your city, is fiscal health. And so that's going to be our general focus, but we're going to be broad ranging and go on a variety of topics. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mark.
Great,
thank you for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
You're a brave man.
I love doing all these kind of shows. It's great.
So I gave a quick intro. Would you like to elaborate on any of that?
Sure, I'll give a very quick bio. I grew up here, went to the public schools. My wife and I moved back 30 years ago. We have 3 kids, 2 of whom are out of the public schools at this point. The third is a junior at high school. I've had the privilege for being in public office for 18 plus years now. I served for 8 years in the school committee, took a couple of years off, and then ran for city council. And I'm starting my 11th year on the city council, and I feel privileged to be able to do this work. It's really very personally very rewarding, and we just have a wonderful city, and I'm proud to have the opportunity to help us do a little bit better each and every day.
Well, perfect. So we have a half an hour. We're not going to be able to cover everything that concerns Newton. But getting to our focus here as taxpayers, we generally are concerned about debt and whether we have manageable debt. And I was discussing with you before the show, Moody's gave a bond rating of AAA, which is awesome, to the city of Newton this coming year. But there were some caveats. They said, I can quote it later if I can pull it up on my phone, that Newton falls under the general level of that expected for a AAA rating based on the amount of debt that they've taken on. They gave the rating because we have a good history of paying back our debts, and they announced that we had some flexibility regarding Proposition 2.5. There was an override at one point, but they do have this warning, and I see it a little bit as an ominous thing, whether we are carrying on too much debt. So I'm wondering if you could maybe address the concept, whether this is a concerning item for the city council, for you, how you approach it, what is there to do? Is it like a cruise ship? We're just going to carry on? I mean, how do we deal with this?
Well, first of all, I say that I think we're an exceptionally fiscally sound city. Every administration that I've worked with over the years and the city council pay very careful attention to our finances, and they look at what we spend very, very carefully. We have had a AAA bond rating for many, many years now. The city is very proud of that. It should be proud of it. It's good for the residents of the city because it means we can borrow at more favorable rates. And we do that because we run our city's affairs properly and carefully. In terms of the caveats, I think actually in the last 10 years or so, the past 2 administrations, including this one, and the city council have been very focused on building up our reserves, which is good. And capital improvements or debt is not necessarily a bad thing. We need to, in fact, we weren't doing a good enough job maintaining our infrastructure. And over the past 10 years or so, as we've improved, we've built 3 new elementary schools, we built a high school, we rebuilt fire stations, we've taken on other significant infrastructure programs, including our water and sewer, our roads and sidewalks. We have a lot more to do, but I think that money is spent quite wisely and quite appropriately. And that's what's the hallmark of a great city. It's when you have those facilities for your residents that's so important. And that's what people value in living here.
No doubt. And I think Newton is a wonderful place. I'm not quite a native here. I grew up in New York City in the Bronx, but my grandparents were in Brookline, and my aunt and uncle and cousins were in Newton. So I have some very brief childhood memories of being in Newton, and it's it was a very lovely place then. It's a lovely place now. I think that there are possibly some warning signs. Whether I'm not sure whether they needed decoder glasses to see them special, but as far as like the schools, so I want to address two separate points. I mean, you're talking about spending money for infrastructure, solid items and so forth, but I don't think that's actually where the budget has been expanding over the years. I think it's been more in the schools and salaries in particular, and not just salaries, but the number of people employed per student. So I'm going to put that out there because I think this city, as many other cities, has had a fractional increase in the percentage of the budget that's devoted to schools per tax dollar. So you can comment on that. Maybe I'll just give you a chance to comment
Sure,
on that.
I'll be happy. I mean, I sat in the school committee for 8 years. Look, when I started elementary school, you had 25 kids in a class. You had no special ed program whatsoever. If a kid couldn't learn well, they just got shunted to the side, and we pretended they didn't really exist very much. We've changed that, and I think that's admirable. We now are far more focused on social and emotional learning for our kids. We try to pick up on learning issues that kids may have in the preschool years. Why? Because that's better for our kids overall. If we deal with problems up front, we're going to be producing much better students and much better individuals in the long run. So I think that's admirable. But does it cost money to have smaller class sizes? Does it cost money to do a good job with special education? Absolutely. And we teach, if you ask any educator, the way they teach now is completely different than the way they may have taught 40 or 50 years ago. And I think in large measure, it's been significant improvements in that. But that doesn't come cheaply.
Well, I'm not necessarily going to dispute anything you said. I'm sure you have a much better pulse on it. You've been here longer and you've been in much more central positions to these matters. But on a numerical data basis, our schools, leaving aside those for whom, say, special education is designed, and I'll assume that's a minority of the students. I mean, everyone's special in his own way. We'll agree with that. But the vast majority of students are neither the geniuses nor those with kind of special needs. But so in the aggregate, your student performance has declined at least relative to other cities of like size and wealth and education level as Newton. And again, I'm not going to chart out any bring out any charts and so forth, but my understanding is that Newton has declined relatively speaking. And again, when I was a kid, my aunt and uncle were so proud to be in like the #1 educational city in the Commonwealth, and I remember hearing that. And I had no reason to disagree and so forth. I had other cousins who lived in Newton as well. And anyway, leaving that aside, can you address whether Newton has done as well, relatively speaking, as when you were here as a student back in?
I mean, I think we continue to have a fabulous educational system in this city. I'm not sure what metrics you're pointing to when you say our education has declined.
I didn't say decline. I said it had been, our schools had been rated #1. I believe, again, I have to go get the data, but I believe in the 60s and 70s, Newton was ranked 1 in the state of Massachusetts for testing and so forth and for outcomes. And it has declined relatively speaking. So it's still, I think, in the upper third or so, upper quarter, but when you discount income level and so forth of the parents, it doesn't do as well as, say, similar cities of kind of, I think, first of all, let me just state at the outset, I think the biggest indicator for how well kids do in school are parental cohesion and parental education level and family structure and so forth. The schools are the schools. And so if you have a kind of a wealthy town where the parents, read and they deal with the kids and they have school, home dinners and so forth, kids do better. That's kind of ipso facto. But but Newton has had a relative decline compared to other cities of like, say, wealth and education.
I would take issue with that. And
Okay.
number one, and number two, this is a much larger city. I mean, if you're going to compare us to a community like Weston, for example, or Carlisle, or Concord, those are small, frankly, much more homogeneous communities. Nothing wrong with that, but we're a far more diverse community in this city. We have many children who do not speak English as a first language. We have people in this city like that. And yes, we have some very well-off people here. Certainly, we are a community as a whole where there's a tremendous value in education, where there's tremendous parental involvement. But we're not a small town. We're not a small, exclusive little town. And I actually think that we do a great job preparing our kids. And it's not just what our test scores are. I mean, test scores are important. They're a way of measuring to make sure you've met things. But I would say that, and I can say this as a parent, because I've got 2 kids who are now well out of high school, they're well out of college. And what you worry about is not just how well educated, quote unquote, they are in terms of their board scores, but you worry about whether they're happy, whether they have the skills to succeed in the workplace, whether they have the social and emotional intelligence to deal with new forms of learning. And if that's been done, then we've succeeded. And that's a hard thing to measure.
No doubt. So I'm going to veer slightly,
Sure.
if you don't mind. Staying within the realm of the schools, I meet at certain dinners and so forth. I don't hang out with teenagers, but there are teenagers present at a bit larger table, certain, Shabbat dinners and whatnot. And I wind up talking to some younger people, and they've expressed some concerns about school lately. And so in particular, I'll just kind of make this into, one person out of like 5 or 6 individuals I've heard this from. But the word is, school has changed a lot. People are not studying as hard. There's been kind of directives to reduce homework, get rid of homework in some aspects. People don't have they're not meeting in classrooms. They don't push as much. There's much less required of them, and much less, and a lower level of kind of, I guess, assignment is acceptable. That the standards have decreased because of COVID, in part, and there's also been, I assume you've heard of CRT, critical race theory. Everyone says it's not taught in the schools. I'm going to leave that out. I think it is part of the ethos of how teachers are taught to teach themselves, and I think it's part of the way they look at things. And there's been, kind of a lot of other kind of funky stuff. I'm going to put it, that's an unofficial term, of the way people are kind of being pitted against each other based on their non-educational characteristics, their skin color, their nationality, all this kind of stuff, and people are being grouped and kind of divided, and it doesn't have a cohesive feel. Anyway, so there's been a lot of pressure for our kids today in schools, and I'll just list them very briefly. Not so much the virus, because the virus didn't affect kids, doesn't really affect teenagers and so forth, but the reaction to, and keeping kids out of school, having them masked still in schools, having lack of conviviality, people the ability of kids' educational and conversational levels and verbal skills have gone down markedly. And this is very well quantitated. So I'll just put all that stuff in your lap, and I apologize. But where are our schools right now, and do you have any concerns about how things were handled during COVID? Do you have any recommendations for how to proceed? And again, I'm not talking about the illness on a personal basis. I'm talking about the way kids who were really never the focus of this particular viron, how they've been kind of like, their needs have been put somewhat aside and put on hold for the duration. So what are we doing for our kids? How are they going to?
You've got a tremendous amount packed in there.
I
that
apologize.
It's a
simple yes/no question.
That I'm never going to be able to respond to completely. And I knew
I
that.
apologize.
I know that's fine.
I apologize.
But let me start off with COVID, okay? And I was among the leaders on the city council that pushed very hard to get our kids back. 2 things: pushed very hard to get our kids back to in-person learning earlier. And 2, push very hard to get a medical advisory group appointed to guide the school system in terms of how it's getting kids back to school. If I have a criticism, and I've been very public about it, we did not get our kids back to in-person learning soon enough, period. And we should have done a better job there. I think it's very difficult in an environment like almost 2 years ago, where all of a sudden we're facing a virus worldwide that we don't know how to deal with. I think there were very difficult decisions to be made, but other school systems, frankly, did a better job than we did getting our kids back to in-person learning. So I think we learned our lesson. I think our kids are now back in in-person learning. When it comes to what we do My personal philosophy is you follow the science, and what that means is you make the best decisions you can based on the evidence that you have.
Fair enough. So I agree with you there. I mean, I always like to put out that science means two distinct things. I covered this a little earlier.
Yeah.
This is one of my pet things. But science is both a body of knowledge that we accept, kind of like an encyclopedia, and yet science also is the continual churning, and there's a scientific process by which to say something actually is the case. It has to be documented and be able to be retested and proven through other means, through experimentation. And so we can't always trust the science, as it were, of something that's happening in real time. It's a little bit like having a Wikipedia page about, about a fire in a building. You might have updates, but the actual end result doesn't happen till that fire has calmed down, until you can investigate. So science is a little bit like Wikipedia, because it's continually being edited, and I think the truth comes out at times. But Catholic schools, for instance, and I gather neither you nor I are Catholic, but I in a sense, my kids they've graduated Newton North a long time ago. They're adults. But if I had kids at this moment, I would strongly consider putting them in Catholic school, because they are doing face-to-face learning without masks. And the science, speaking to the science, they have had no greater outbreaks or danger to the teachers, administrators, or anybody else who chooses to wear a mask and so forth than the public schools. There's been no added benefit. As far as science goes, you're welcome to wear what you want to go to a place, and I can wear what I want. We could go to a party and you wear your suit and you look handsome, and I wear what I'm wearing, and we could maybe come up with a scientific experiment who does better at that party. It'd be difficult. But it may not really matter at all, because there are so many other things in account. The science, as it was happening in real time, Sweden kept the schools open for the duration, never with masks, and never closing the schools, and they had no real difference from Norway, from Denmark, from Germany, and so forth. And so when people choose to look, the science, as it were, is a much broader concept. There's a lot of social experimentation happening between states, between countries, and between places, and even here between different types of schools.
So let me, if I could, respond to that.
Sure.
It's not a perfect process, and as I said a moment ago, there's science and there's evidence, and you expect people to make reasonable judgments to the best of their ability based on evidence. Two different people, two different school systems might make a different judgment as to whether or not to wear a mask. Here's something there's no judgment anymore about. Get vaccinated. And I personally believe that every person, unless there's a medical reason when they should not be vaccinated, needs to be vaccinated in this country. The evidence is uncontrovertible about that.
Well, I don't want to make this into a medical show, but this is sort of up my alley. I'm a big vax guy, pro-vax, double thumbs up. I got every single flu shot since I graduated medical school. I've had a flu shot every single year. I love vaccines. I've vaccinated thousands, if not tens of thousands of people over the years. However, not every vaccine is perfect for every situation. And in particular, my little trope these days is we are giving a COVID-19 vaccination. So that is a virus that was in China in probably June 2019. It has mutated many, many times, as we know, because we have Greek letters and all that kind of stuff, went alpha, beta, delta, gamma, and so forth. And then we went through epsilon, we skipped nu and chi, but we are at Omicron right now. And so we are actually giving an antiquated version to what is actually called these days the ancestral version of COVID-19. And we are right now in 2022. So I appreciate that part. I think vaccines worked for the initial part. If we could have had them out from day one, that would have been even more awesome. And I think it's great, and I recommend the vaccination, particularly for people for whom there are health situations. However, for 10-year-olds and 9-year-olds and 15-year-olds, there's no way we can know the long-term health manifestations of a vaccine that's brand new, A, and B, these people don't get ill. And there's no reason and as we've seen with vaccinated people with Omicron, that people can still communicate this virus because this is one is actually not protected by the ancestral vaccine. So I'm on board with you. I know it's a political stance and so forth, but
I think where that falls apart is that 10-year-old may then be a carrier, even if they have no symptoms, and get their grandparents.
Well, this is somewhat of a misnomer. I don't. We could.
We could probably do this another time.
Yeah,
Bottom line is.
So let's move on.
You asked about the schools. I mean, I think our schools, education has changed a lot about in the past 50 or 60 years. How we teach history, for example, has changed a lot. I was an American history major in college. And I think, for the most part, it has changed for the good. And that is, it is really important to give our kids not just kind of a glossed overview of history, but to put it in context, to understand that there's good things that we do and there's bad things we do, to understand the context of the times people live in, and to understand that a historic figure in 1750 had different social mores and other things that would be very different than someone
Absolutely.
living in 2000.
I agree with you there.
But,
I'm actually.
but I think it's really where schools made a mistake for many, many years, and I think we're far better at it, is to gloss over the things that we didn't do well. How we treated Native Americans in this country is a perfect example, and we do a much better job about talking about that today than we did 50 years ago, and that's good and that's healthy. And I actually think that our kids, particularly by the time they're in high school, have the ability to engage in that kind of critical thinking, and it's actually very good for them to be able to do that.
I'm into critical thinking. Modestly, I'd like to think I actually practice critical thinking. So I think you do as well, and I'm happy. I think evidence is that you're here and that you're discussing these topics. So I give you my full appreciation. I want to make that as a matter of record. So let's get to what's to be done. What does MarcLaredo see as Newton's biggest challenges right now? And if you were pulling the strings more than a single city councilor can, what would you do? And what do you recommend for people in Newton? What's the direction? What do you think about the growth that's happening? What do you think about things going on in our schools? What's to be changed? What are you happy with? What are you unhappy with?
Sure. I mean, it's a very broad-based question, but I'm happy to give you some oversight. Look, we all have to pay very careful attention to our budget. There's no doubt that there's two budgetary factors that are really important to pay attention to. One is that a number of our sources of revenue, meals tax, parking revenues, things like that, went down because of COVID. And those are very real drops, millions of dollars of income that disappeared that we ordinarily would rely on. The good news is we've got some federal funds called ARPA funds, American Rescue Plan funds, that have helped bridge some of that gap. But that's something we always got to pay very careful attention to. Two, the administration, both this administration and the past administration, I think have done a very good job of understanding that we had a lot of unfunded liabilities, both in the pension area and what are called OPEB, or primarily health insurance for retirees, that were not properly funded, period. And that was and is a growing obligation for future Newtonians. And so for the past 10 years, we've been spending an increased amount of money every year to try to bridge that gap. We are doing that, and that's prudent. I also think we have to be paying very careful attention to our infrastructure, and frankly, we should not be afraid to spend money. I know that's something that you may not want to hear.
I'm never afraid to spend money. Okay, I have this wonderful set of. I've got a cell phone. I got. I think it's important to spend money. The question is whether you spend more money than what you have. And the question is whether you're spending money with ever any savings. I mean, it's almost, I think it's almost an impossibility. It's probably not physically an impossibility for a city to have extra money, but it always seems that we're running on debt. I understand when you do certain capital things, like we're making the example of one's own home. If I want to build a new deck or something like that, I might borrow money to do that, fine. But that's the value of my own house. I'm going to maintain it better than the city does. The Newton, previous Newton North lasted from 1975 to 2015 or something like that. That's what, how many? Is that 25, 40 years or something like that? That's crazy for a building. This new one, I don't think government handles its own responsibilities as well as a private citizen does. But be that as it may, I'm curious. Everybody who's come on the show likes to spend money in the crucial places. So given that there's only a certain amount of pie, and you can't have, there's a joke about pizza. You know, you go for a pizza, and guy says, "I'll cut it in 8 slices." Oh, no, I'm not that hungry. Cut it in 6 slices. I mean, there's only a certain amount of pizza. I mean, how you cut it matters. Are you going to add more pizza? Are you going to try to raise taxes, or are you trying to cut out some certain things so that we have enough to go around?
Well, let's be clear on one thing. The city does not operate in debt. We're not the federal government. We can't print money.
Okay.
We balance our budget every year.
Okay.
Period. So every year is a balanced budget.
But you were mentioning the unfunded liabilities, correct?
Those are long-term unfunded. They're not operating liabilities. They're long-term liabilities that we have to retirees 20, 30, 40 years from now.
So when those come in, if they, let's say we're 20 years from now, what would we be saying, our future selves be saying to our current selves about what we're doing now when those things pop onto the budget?
We'd say thank you, because we're funding the pension liability and the OPEB liability at increased rates, far above the current cost. And we're doing that in large part so that we are freeing future generations from being liable for those liabilities that they did not incur.
Are our unfunded liabilities growing or shrinking as we go through the last few years?
The pension unfunded liability shrinking rather dramatically.
Okay.
The health insurance liability is still growing. We're doing a much better job as well on a current basis of funding those, so that for current employees, we're properly funding them.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes left.
Great.
I'm going to try to leave you, or have you have the last words here. Within the realm of the City Council, what are the battles that you are seeing prospectively, and what's your vision, and how would you fix things?
So look, but as I said, budget is critical. How we do capital improvements, we're going to have some very, I don't want to say difficult, but lengthy discussions about capital improvements. A lot of views that we should have a new senior center. I'm fully in support of that. We need to do work at a number of our schools, our elementary schools. We still have a couple of fire stations ahead of us, and we need to do improvements both at Gathpool and Crystal Lake. I think those are very significant improvements in addition to our sidewalks and roads. We also are engaged at the city level in an ongoing effort to review our zoning code. And I think that is a very significant discussion that has implications far beyond our time tonight. I simply urge people to pay very careful attention to it, because that will change what Newton looks like physically over the coming decades.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we are running short on time, so I'm very happy to hear your answers. I think you bring a capable, articulate enunciation of your views, and I appreciate your care for the city. I hope that conversely you understand our concerns, that we try to make things whole. We're going to wrap up this show, but we also want to, insofar as we can, keep our obligations, especially with the rising inflation, all that kind of stuff, that we don't know what's on the horizon, that we are careful and cautious with our fundings.
And I would urge you to continue to speak out. We need all the voices in this city to speak, and it's very important that we hear all of them.
Oh, thank you so much.
You.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure.